Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with Dr. Kate Hayes about her career in sport and performance psychology and about her new book, How to Win. Kate and I both studied at Sheffield Hallam University, where we both got our PhDs, and we were both supervised by a real legend in sports psychology, Professor Ian Maynard. As I think most people in the world of sport and performance psychology are aware, Ian sadly passed away in the middle of March this year, 2025, after a 15-month battle with cancer. At the time of recording, we knew that Ian wasn't in the best of health. And so Kate and I talked about it, and we both really wanted to dedicate this episode to Ian and to his family, his wife Rachel and his children, Chloe and Jack. You might have already read some of the incredible tributes that talk about Ian and his career in sports psychology, his applied work with some of Great Britain's most successful teams, sailing, cycling, diving, just to name a few. You probably know about his work in academia, his research, his contributions to the field, and his work with BASES and the BPS and ASP. But on a more personal note, Ian had a really significant impact on my career. He offered me a PhD position at Sheffield Hallam, which really put my whole life on an entirely new trajectory. He had a huge impact on my development as well, as a researcher, as a teacher, as a consultant, and as a person. And I know that he did the same for many, many Hallam graduates as well, who've all gone on to do some really amazing things in the field of sports psychology. But I always felt like Ian had my back as well in supporting me to go to conferences, to put my work out there. And he would always take the time, despite being kind of one of the big dogs, he would always take the time at those huge conferences to just introduce me to whoever he was talking to and to make me feel like a real part of what was going on and to help me make connections that I still draw on today. So I just wanted to take this time to pay tribute to Ian. And I know Kate also wanted to make sure that we did that in this episode. And just to acknowledge just how big an impact he had on the whole field of sports psychology. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Human beings can do brilliant things when they aren't in a great place mentally, but I think the cost of that is really high and it's not sustainable over time.
Hi everyone and welcome to yet another episode of the number one sports podcast, 80% Mental. If I say that enough times, it feels like it's true. This series we are diving into the psychology of all things exercise, health and well-being. And Leah Washington, normal co-host, can't make it today because of some scheduling conflicts. So we miss you, Leah. But in today's episode, we're going to explore how we can use tips and techniques from the world of sport and performance psychology to help us in our daily lives. And I'm super excited to welcome our guest today, because if there's one person who can help us to understand how to translate lessons from elite sport into actions that we can all take, it's the one and only Dr. Kate Hayes. Kate, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thank you very much, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. For people who don't know Kate, Kate's career spans 2 decades of working with Olympic teams, professional athletes and organizations at the highest levels. And Kate currently serves as the head of women's performance psychology at the Football Association, FA, supporting the England women's football team. But we're not allowed to talk about that because it's a secret. So, Kate, just kind of set the scene a little bit. I don't really want to say how long ago, but it feels like a million years ago. You were brought onto my supervisory team when I started doing my PhD, and you were kind of just finishing up your own PhD at the time, I think. So you were kind of just starting out on this 20-year career as a sports psychologist. What kind of drew you to sports psychology in the first place?
When was that, by the way? It does seem like a million years ago.
Does, yeah. So I think, I can't even remember. I think it was around about 2007, I want to say.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I started my PhD and you were finishing yours, I think, at the time.
Yeah, that sounds about right. What drew me to psychology? Well, I think I'll start by saying that I had absolutely no intention of ever going to university. So I didn't want to do a degree. I certainly didn't want to do a master's, and I absolutely, most definitely did not want to do a PhD. But what I really wanted was to be the next Sally Gunnell, or Kelly Holmes, or any one of those amazing athletes that were around at the time where I was growing up. And I think the thing that drew me to sport, I was just absolutely fanatical about sport. So I grew up in a family where all of us did sport at some level, whether that was swimming or running or triathlon. My brother and I used to get up on a Sunday morning and run straight downstairs to see kind of Sunday grandstand and watch Eurosport and all the things that were on at that time. And I just genuinely just loved sport. And then I'd gone on a warm weather training camp with a different coach who'd started to make some adjustments to my running style. And that's when I started to get a pain in my knee. And that pain in my knee just essentially dogged the rest of my career. And I could just never, I could never get rid of it. And I still remember to this day going into to get the results of the MRI scan, and the consultant saying to me, look, you're just not built for running. This isn't for you. And it was that moment of, okay, well, now what? Well, sports science wasn't then what it is now. I'm pretty sure if that happened to me now, there'd be some magician out there that would probably be able to fix it. But at that time, it was a relatively unknown. But the thing about that was, it's suddenly like, okay, well, that career plan is not for me. That's not the way that's going to pan out. So what do I do instead? I hadn't even gone to look at any universities. I just had no interest really. And then my older brother, 2 years older, had kind of gone through the process. So it was literally digging out the old prospectuses from under Tom's bed to just choose the best 6 of the ones that we had knocking about the house. But it was a really easy decision for me to go and study psychology. So as much as I love sport, and I did, and I loved going to Crystal Palace and watching the track and field athletes, and that was around the time of John Regis and Chris Akabusi, and it was just an unbelievable time to be into athletics. But psychology was my other great love, and people often ask me why, and I genuinely don't know the answer to that. But for as long as I can remember, I was fascinated in human behaviour, the things that I read, the stuff that I watched. It was all about, why do people do the things that they do? Why are there such differences between human beings and in the way they act and behave, etc.? So I'd studied psychology at A level, and it was like, well, if I'm going to university, which I am now doing because I don't have a plan B, it's to go and study psychology. And I absolutely just loved it. I just absolutely loved it. And then it was during my psychology degree that I found out about this thing called sports psychology. So for me, I mean, it was just amazing. Like, they're my 2 biggest passions, and you could actually do that for a living. Who knew? So then I got to the end of university, and I remember going up to Sheffield Hallam. I still remember it vividly, and having my interview with Professor Maynard, and being offered the place on the master's course, and then deciding, well, I'm not going to start just yet. I'm going to go backpacking, because I figured that once you get on this journey, it's going to be hard to get off. So I'm just going to delay the start for a little bit. And I went traveling around the world for 12 months, and then started my master's, and then did the PhD that I never thought I would do. And I guess the rest is history, really.
It's funny because I did exactly the same sort of story. I just had a bigger gap between finishing my psychology degree and realizing that sports psychology was a thing that existed. So I was kind of just dusting around for 4 years.
But it was still relatively unknown then, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, when did I finish university? It must have been 2001, maybe. So at that time, it was still relatively new. People still weren't really aware of it. And I mean, the internet hadn't long been a thing. I
tell my students this all the time. I tell my students that when I was at university, we barely had email.
Honestly, we had to go to the tutor room to get our assignments, like pull a piece of paper off with our name on it. There was no Google search. It was literally going to the library, trawling through journals, photocopying things. I mean, it's crazy now when you look back on it, isn't it? But Anyway, then this new internet, I remember searching for sports psychology, and the name that just kept coming up over and over again was Professor Ian Maynard. Yeah. So I thought to myself, right, okay, well, I'm going to go and speak to Professor Ian Maynard, and if there's probably a place to go, it's Sheffield Hallam. So that's what I'm going to do. And best decision I ever made.
Oh, awesome. And you said about the fact that obviously, back in the pre-internet days and sports psychology was sort of barely a thing. Like, obviously 20 years down the line now, like, how have you seen sports psychology and performance psychology, how have you seen that evolve? Like, how is it different now to maybe when you started?
I think it's evolved so much, and not just the discipline, but the perceptions of the discipline. I think both of those things. So I when I first started out, I think there was still a reticence about sports psychology, and I think it was still viewed as, what if there's an issue? Then you go and speak to the sports psychologist, and then that's quite separate from the day-to-day, from coaching. So then there's it wasn't always accepted by coaches who didn't want somebody else getting in between the relationship with them and their athletes, and there was a lot of that kind of view. And I've not really experienced that since. And I think we live in a world now where the sports psychologist is one of the first people on the staff sheet. And certainly in Olympic and Paralympic sport, it's very, very unusual these days for there not to be a sports psychologist supporting the team. Mm-hmm. So I think the perception of it as a kind of problem-solving service has probably changed. I think it is viewed much more as a proactive performance enhancement service, just in the same way that you would go to see a nutritionist if you wanted to improve your nutrition, or you'd work with a strength and conditioning coach if you wanted to improve your physicality. I think it's very much seen now as, a sports psychologist can help facilitate the positive side of your performance from a mental point of view. So I do think that the perceptions have changed, but I also just think the way in which the discipline operates is completely different. I know from when I was training that a lot of stuff we did during our masters and during the supervised experience process was very much around mental skills training. And I look back to the sort of work that I was doing when I started out and delivering workshops around goal setting and anxiety management and confidence and those kind of things. And, it sets a good foundation, but I can't really remember the last time I delivered that type of work.
Yeah.
And I think it now is accepted that having psychology within a sports system can actually have a impact organisationally, systemically. But that was a really interesting piece for us to wrestle as a team when I used to work at the UKSI. And I remember really clearly after the Rio Olympics thinking, okay, where do we go from here? What does sports psychology look like for this next Olympiad, for the next 4-year cycle? And I think people talk a good game about working systemically and working organisationally. But when you ask people, okay, well, explain that to me. What does that look like? What does that mean? Then it becomes a little bit more vague. And I really wanted to kind of drill down to, well, when we say that, what do we mean? What does it look like? And the team at that time did a really incredible piece of work around what does sports psychology look like? What does sports psychology look like in the context of high performance sport when you're thinking about working more organisationally?
So what does that mean then? You talk about working systemically, working organisationally, like,
yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, where it came from, where those conversations came from was that we were speaking to sports and we were speaking to different coaches and performance directors around, if sports psychology is done even more successfully over this next 4-year period, what would you see? And the answer that we got back was there are still a lot of athletes that are managing with the environment of an Olympic Games. They're not thriving in that environment. They've got coping strategies in place and they are coping, but they're not thriving. So then as a team, what we started to talk about, well, what does thriving look like? And we had all these different ideas about maybe we could do like multi-sport CPD, where we give people the opportunity to come in from athletics or swimming, all these different sports, and go on a journey together. But what we kept coming back to was, but then they go back into their environment. And if their environment isn't conducive to performance and to positive mental health, then it potentially reduces the efficacy of an intervention like that. Mm-hmm. So then that obviously leads to, okay, well then what does the environment need to look like? And what are the things that would be non-negotiable if you're trying to create an environment that lends itself to performance? And we just we wrestled with that over a prolonged period of time, and we spoke to lots of different people, whether that was academics, whether it was people from military, whether it was people from sport, whether it was our own psychology team. And where we got to in the end was almost like a set of guiding principles around, actually, these are the things we think need to be in place in an environment in order to lay a foundation for then doing a lot of the intervention work that you would maybe consider more traditional sports psychology. So whether that's pressure training, etc. And pressure training is a good example, because if you deliver pressure training in an environment where there isn't a good balance of challenge and support, where there isn't good processes for reflection, for debriefing, where there isn't support around how you build coping skills, then essentially it's not useful, but maybe even more so damaging in some way. So I think that's where we got to as a team. The systemic bit is, what is non-negotiable in an environment? What are the sorts of things that need to be in place? How do you get people aligned so that you are then in the best position possible to be able to deliver what we would probably consider more bread and butter or traditional kind of sports psychology techniques?
Mm-hmm. We had Dr. Mike Stoker on an episode last series talking about pressure training. So if anybody wants to know a little bit more about pressure training, you can go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah, and Mike Stoker was involved in that project in our team, and obviously, you know, that the pressure training work that he did was fundamental to that.
I'm interested because you described earlier, you described sports psychology as a performance enhancement service. And I'm just kind of interested because obviously over the last certainly 10 years, definitely 5 years, we've seen this shift towards a focus on mental health and well-being. And you mentioned thriving just then as well. Like, talk to me a little bit about that intersection between well-being and performance, and maybe kind of how that fits in with some of the work that you might do.
Yeah, it's an interesting reflection, and it's certainly, again, one of the conversations that we had as a team, because and anecdotally and supported by research, I'm certainly of the opinion that human beings can do brilliant things when they aren't in a great place mentally. Mm-hmm. But I think the cost of that is really high, and it's not sustainable over time. And so where we certainly got to as a psychology team with the UKSI is that we want to be able to facilitate environments that enable people to enhance their performance, but in a way that's conducive to positive mental health. And I don't think that they sit at two ends of a continuum. I don't buy into that at all. I think you can create environments that are conducive to mental health, but also provide the opportunity for people to enhance their performance. And I think quite often it's viewed as one or the other.
It's an either or, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just don't think that needs to be the case. I think you can do the two things concurrently. And that's certainly the approach that we started to take. I'm still of the belief that the reason that you would engage with the services of a performance or a sports psychologist is because you want to enhance your performance. Essentially, that's the crux, I believe, still at the root of what I do as a job. Mm-hmm. I just try to deliver that job in a way in which is conducive to positive mental health. And we can, all of us, have an impact on that. But I think it's a responsibility of everybody within an organisation. The organisational culture, the environment doesn't rest on the shoulders of one individual. And if it does, then that starts to become problematic. The way of creating environments that are conducive to mental health is when everybody has a responsibility for that. And ultimately everybody does. And so when you strip it back, I don't think the crux of what sports psychology is about has changed. I still believe that you engage with a sports psychology because you're essentially looking for improving performance. I just think that the way in which that is done, and the way in which a sports psychology now has the opportunity to work with senior leadership teams, to work with the culture, to work with the individuals that set that culture, I think that's where you've started to see a shift.
So I was going to say, when you're talking then about this systems approach, this organizational approach, you're talking about the sports psychologist working with the coach, the performance director, the medical team, like the whole system essentially, and trying to create this culture, this environment that's conducive to, I suppose, well-being, but and performance at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think particularly when you're working in team sport, you have to do that. And I think for me, that was a really interesting shift. Like the sport that I worked in most regularly early on in my career was diving. And it's an individual sport. So you work with small cells of athletes that have a personal coach, and you can do a lot of really good one-to-one mental skills development type work. And for a sport like that, it lends itself perfectly. It's a closed skill sport. It's not, the performances are not influenced by environment, by any of those pieces. It's your ability to execute 5 or 6 skills as well as you can across a 2-3 hour period. So that type of sport lends itself brilliantly to all of the type of work that I've been doing during my training. And then I got my first job in a professional rugby team, and it's like, okay, this now feels very, very different. I mean, for lots of different reasons, but not least, you've suddenly got 50 players in a squad. You're not going to get very far from a performance enhancement perspective by doing lots and lots of individual one-to-one work. So then you have to think, okay, well, how does it look different in this environment? How do I apply some of the principles that I've learned through my training, but make that applicable to a team? And the only way that you can really do that is then you start working alongside and with and through the staff. So I didn't have the answers then, Pete, to be completely honest. I'd gone from training into an individual based sport, then into a team, and I was trying to make sense of, okay, what does this look like? What's my framework? What am I evaluating it against? And I didn't really have that. And so I think that's what I've tried to do probably over this last 20 years, because I work relatively simply. I need to know what I'm working against. I've essentially tried to create a framework for myself so that when I walk into an organization now, I do know what I'm looking for. I do know what I'm assessing that against. And I do know the sorts of things that I think are useful to have in place in order for that team to be successful.
Cool. Well, we'll get to some of that in a little bit, because I want to talk about, obviously, your book, How to Win: Lessons in Success from the Front Line of Performance Psychology. But before we get to that, obviously, you talked about a couple of your experiences there. Is there anything that like really stands out to you over that 20-year career working in sport and performance? It's times when either, you've thought, yeah, I've absolutely nailed that as a sports psychologist, or just things that have just stood out as like being amazing experiences?
There are so many. And what I've reflected on is that all of them involve the emotional connection with other people. And we talk, don't we, about psychologists, about being impartial and being aware of our own biases. And of course we do need to, and all of those things are true. But sports psychology is probably quite different to other facets of psychology, in that you are ingrained within a team, and sometimes for a really prolonged period of time. And because of that, you understand the stories of the people that you work alongside. You understand their backgrounds, you understand their trials and tribulations, you understand the barriers that they've had to overcome and how much it means to them. And so you can't help but become emotionally engaged in that process.
Yeah. And I suppose there's like an investment in the outcome as well, because you're part of that performance team, right?
100%. But there are several moments that stand out for me. And I remember the first time, because when I started working in diving, I was working with a group of junior divers, and through my time there, that group of junior divers transitioned into senior divers and started to compete on the international stage. And I still vividly remember the first time 2 of those individuals won a medal at a world event, and just feeling so excited and so proud for them, because I'd know the journey that they'd been on and how hard they'd worked to get to that point. And I think I've been so lucky in my career that I've quite often come into environments and come into sports that have been on a journey. I've not that often come in at the point where, or I've not often come in and worked with individuals that have regularly been winning on the world stage. And so I feel so lucky that the opportunities that I've had have all been opportunities where I've been able to be part of a team that's gone on a journey with individuals. So that was a highlight moment for me. When Tom Daley won his first Olympic medal in London, I'll never forget that moment.
National treasure, Tom Daley. Give him
national treasure,
title.
Tom Daley. He is a national treasure and an exceptional and inspiring human being. But to see that and know the story behind that and the significance of that event for him, that was phenomenal. There's so many, and you know, the Euros final, but all of them for different reasons. And the Euros final was just unbelievable. Looking around, but it's families that tournament brought families together. And there was a piece of it in the FA around uniting the game, inspiring the nation, and the societal impact that football can have. And experiencing that first time, I mean, what an absolute privilege. But I still remember coming home after the tournament and going to the local pub and families coming up to me and just saying that tournament has made a difference on our family. Like, we watched those games with the kids, we went to matches, and that environment of women's football is a phenomenal environment for families. It's safe and it's fun and it's inspiring and it's all the things that you want and hope sport would and can be. So I mean, yeah, there's so many of them, and that they are linked, actually, most of them, to successes. But it's not just the shiny piece of metal that hangs around your neck. It's the story. That's the bit that it's so unbelievable to be a part of.
This is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Dr. Kate Hayes, and we're talking about how to win. Lessons from sports psychology that we can apply to kind of everyday life. Kate, I want to talk a little bit about your book that you've just written. I have read it. I really like it. It's really accessibly written. So it's kind of easy for anybody who's not a sports psychologist, who doesn't have a background in psychology, to kind of pick up and understand. And you've done a really great job of translating some of those lessons from your own career into everyday practice. You've spoken a little bit about being nervous, putting yourself out there, kind of like, writing and putting your thoughts out there. What was it that made you want to write the book in the first place? There's three pretty clear reasons for me that led me to embark on that project. So we've touched upon it already, the transition from working in individual sport and then going into team sport. And I didn't feel like I had a framework for how sports psychology could be delivered on a team level or organisationally. So a big driver for me was I would like to make some of the lessons learned accessible to others. And actually, this is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, Pete, anyway, which you may well know, but there is so much research that takes place in sport that finds its way into journals and is written in an academic way. And very often it's the individuals with skin in the game that don't have any part in that research or that process or are setting the questions. And I'm not sure how much of it is read by those that are operating on the front line. And I really wanted to write a sports psychology book that felt more like a storybook and was accessible to anybody. I've been hugely privileged over the last 20 years to have worked with some unbelievable athletes, coaches, support staff, and I've learned so much from every single person that I've had the opportunity to work alongside. I don't think those stories or those lessons or those learnings are readily shared. I don't think unless you're inside the system that you have an opportunity to learn from the multiple people that are. And so it was really important to me that I wrote something that people could access and people could pick up and people could read it and read it in a way, like you said, that's accessible to anybody. But it was just an opportunity to share learning. And I would have loved that. I would have loved to have something like that when I started out, that enabled me to organise my thoughts in a systematic way. So that was the big driver, really, is that I would have loved that. And working at the UKSI, working in some of the teams that I've had, we've had the opportunity to learn from each other, to share practice with each other, to share ideas, to be creative, to bounce off each other. And I think that when you're
outside of a system like that, it's really, really difficult to get that kind of content. So that was a big reason. The second reason is, as we've touched upon already, I don't buy into this idea that performance environments need to be all challenged without the support. I genuinely believe that you can achieve extraordinary human performance in environments that are difficult and challenging, but also are high in support. And so that was a message that I really wanted to convey with the book. And then the third was that for me, I had the opportunity to do this. I've got 3 children that spend a huge amount of their time with mum, who knows where. They have absolutely no understanding what a sports psychologist is or where I go. They just see the tracksuit getting pulled on and know that means mum is not going to be at home for a little while. And so I really wanted to just capture some of the stuff that I did in the hope that one day that they would pick it up and read it and have more of an insight into what it is that I did and where I went, and hopefully, more of a, it sounds a bit grandeur, like a legacy project, but I wanted something for the kids.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I like that. I obviously the book's called How to Win. I spoke last series with Kath Bishop about success. And the blurb from your book says, like, teaching you how to find your purpose, fulfill your potential, and thrive. How close is that to your like personal definition of winning?
I think it's totally synonymous with my definition of winning. I think the thing is, Pete, and I've said this lots of times before, in performance environments, everybody wants to win. Everybody does. Yeah. Everybody involved in sport wants to win. Every time you watch your team on a Sunday play, you want them to win. Everybody wants to win, but not everybody gets the opportunity to. And so the only way of protecting yourself within that is becoming so lost in the process that you are able to optimize the opportunity of doing that. You're able to maximize the chances, but it's never, ever totally in your control. Yeah. And so I think that if you can reflect back on a career and know that you did absolutely everything that you could have done, that you gave yourself the best opportunity, you had a great experience along the way, whether you did or whether you didn't, you've still learned, you've still developed, you've still moved forward.
So let's talk about the like the model itself, because the book's based around this model, these four kind of like building blocks of sort of how to win, essentially. Tell us a little bit about the model, where it came from, and then maybe we'll kind of get into some specifics.
I think where did it come from is an amalgamation of lots and lots of different experiences, opportunities, collaborations with various different people across the years. And where I got to with it was, I work very, very simply, as you could tell, you've read the book. I wanted to make sense of a complex world in a way that made sense to me, so that when I start working with a new team or when I start working with a new organization, I can walk in there and go, okay, right, where does this team sit currently in relation to the pieces that are important? And essentially that's what the framework does. Over that time, over those 20 years, I've got to a place where I think those are the things that are non-negotiable. I think that people have to be aligned to a higher purpose, that they have to understand what they're there to do, that's been broken down into then short, medium term targets. They've got really well-defined methods in terms of how they achieve those targets, but also that the human element runs through absolutely everything that they do. So I do believe that if let's take a football team for an example, if you want to hold each other to account, if you want to be able to perform at your best under the greatest pressure, you do need to understand something about the people that are stood either side of you. In order to be able to challenge, to hold people to account, to demand standards, you have to have some level of connection that goes past the banter and the fun and the fun and the joke.
So tell us, break down the model for us. What are these building blocks of success?
So the first one is that, who are we? So do you have an in-depth understanding of who you are and the people that are the people in the room with you? Do you understand where your strengths are? Do you understand where there's areas of development? Do you understand how you show up under pressure? Do you have a good understanding of how you prepare, of what you value, of how your past experiences have led you to become the person that you are? So that whole piece is really about people. It's about, do you have a thorough, in-depth understanding of yourself and the people around you? And are you able to use that information efficiently to get the best out of yourselves? So that's the first piece. Then the second piece is around why we're here. And that's all about purpose. That's all about, is the team aligned against a higher purpose? And there's loads of talk, isn't there, about values. And this is a real thing for me. Yeah. Like, you can walk into any organization and there's words on the wall, right? Like the mission statement, and for me, I think those days spent in office conference centers where you're talking about, is it confidence or is it humility, or should it be honesty, or is it trust, or ultimately everybody has their own value system, and what drives me is going to be potentially different to what drives you.
Yeah.
So trying to make those things the same to me seems futile. But what you can do is say, okay, but you've got your own background, you've got your own experiences, you're shaped by those, as am I. But we're in this thing together, and what is our collective higher purpose? What is the thing that we're going after? So that why piece is about, why are we here individually and collectively? And therefore, if we're clear on that, what is absolutely non-negotiable in terms of giving us the best opportunity to achieve? And the who piece, we do a lot of value-based work, but it's more on an individual level. It's understanding the individuals within the room. The why piece is around purpose of individuals, but collectively as a team. Then how that's broken down into achievable targets, and how that's then broken down into behaviours. And then what does that look like on the day-to-day, and how are we able to hold each other account to that? When can we put the mirror up? How do we put the mirror up? Those kinds of things. Yeah. So that's the second building block. The third building block is around how we play, and essentially that's method. So we've got people, we've got purpose, and now we've got method, which is essentially the process. So it's being absolutely regimented and thorough in terms of how you then break the achievements down into just processes. What does that actually look like? What will that look like in 4 years' time, 3 years' time? What does that mean for us on a week-to-week, day-to-day? What's our method for performing under pressure as collectively and individually, etc.? And then the final piece is around the how do we win, which that's about the tools and environment. So that might be tools on an individual level, whether that's breath work, whether it's visualization, whether it's that kind of mental skills training piece. But it's also that environmental piece. It's about the balance of challenge and support. It's about creating an environment where people have got the opportunity to thrive, where they've got autonomy, where they can make decisions for themselves, where people care about what happens to you post-tournament, where there's a support in place for decompression. It's all of those pieces. And it sounds neat, doesn't it, that you work through this, who are we, why are we here, what's our method? And it's never that simple, is it? Like things never go in a linear trajectory. It's always a bit up, down, sideways. But I feel confident, and in all the different sports that I've had the opportunity to work in, and with all the athletes that I've had the opportunity, I think that when those pieces are in place, where people do have an understanding of who, why, their method, and they're in an environment that's conducive to positive mental health as well as performance, you see people thrive.
So you've kind of broken down the model for us, and these 4 building blocks of success. And I want to kind of dig into them a little bit, into each one, because it would be really cool to just get a sense of, well, like, how do we do some of this stuff? So anybody who's listening who kind of is interested in, first of all, go buy the book, but can we give them some tips, some strategies that maybe you've used, or kind of some of the stories that you can share? So the first part was all about self-awareness, really. The kind of like, who are we, right? Self-awareness. You talked about individual values, personality. One of the things that you talked about in the book as well was this idea of super strengths, and people finding their super strengths. Can you tell us a little bit about that, maybe? How might I recognize what I'm good at, and then what do I do with that?
Yeah, I can. And I think for those people listening to this that have got an interest, is to look up Kate Ludlam as well, who is I don't know if you've interviewed her on your podcast, Pete. Another Hallam graduate.
Throw that out there. Mike from earlier as well.
who has he's done some incredible work in this space. But essentially the idea of super strengths, where does that come from? Is that we can we can choose where we spend our time in terms of what we develop. And quite often as human beings, we tend to focus on the things that maybe we're not doing so well, or we feel are undermining our performances, where sometimes the biggest performance gains can come from focusing on the strengths and turning them into super strengths. And essentially it's a philosophy of positive psychology around thriving, but identifying the areas in which you have got a real talent. And then when you're planning and when you're getting lost in the process and you're putting your method together, you're spending as much, if not more time, really honing the things that you're good at, as well as bringing up the areas that aren't strengths at that moment in time. And I remember speaking to Kate when she was doing her PhD, and my PhD is, I think, is in confidence, and the two things are pretty aligned. But with the people think that you're either confident or you're not, and that you can go out there just excited and ready to go. And it's not that simple. Like, confidence essentially is a set of evidence-based beliefs. I could feel terrible, but still have the confidence to be able to perform because I have an evidence base for being able to do that. Yeah. And that, again, is where this self-reflection piece comes in. It's self-reflection is about creating evidence for your belief systems. So reflecting on what you're doing, understanding where your strengths are, how you can recreate the stuff that you do well, how you can start to eliminate the things that you don't do so well. All of that feeds into a confidence bank, because all the time you're collating evidence as to why you can do the things that you're trying to do. So I think the strengths-based approach, positive psychology, and building confidence go hand in hand, really. It's about collating evidence so that when you are in pressure situations where your limbic system is in full charge, when you're about to deliver a presentation or pitch an idea and your heart's racing and your hands are sweating and your head's going, I don't know if I can do this, you have an alternate viewpoint, which is, actually, I know I expected to feel this way. It's okay to feel this way. And I know that I can perform in these circumstances because, and you have an evidence base that can only come from self-reflection, from trial and error, from good preparation.
So what's kind of your number one tip, I guess, or strategy for people to develop that skill of self-awareness? Because I think it is a skill, right? Because you can get better at it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can get better at it. And again, with my simplistic approach, I think the easiest thing to do is reviewing performances in a really simplistic but regular way. So what happened, what was good and why, what didn't work and why not, and what does that information tell me in order for influencing how I approach what I do tomorrow. And it's really, really simple, 5 minutes. But quite often, and particularly you find this with the youngsters, where their cognitive ability is potentially not as developed. It's not a habit that you necessarily fall into.
Yeah, so it's that consistency, right?
Yeah, and I was aware. I remember working with a junior group at diving, and I was so aware of this. Like, I'd be on the pool side, and they'd come running over. Oh, did you see that, Kate? Did you see it? Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it was so good. Okay, yeah. Why do you think that was? And then suddenly you get this completely blank look that they haven't considered. They've just known that they've gone into training that day and smashed it, but haven't considered what were the things that happened that enabled it to work on that day. And it's why I've got young kids, 5 and a 7-year-old and a 14-year-old, and the youngsters are playing football, particularly the 7-year-old. And one week they are unbelievable, and the next week it's like they've never ever played football before. That it's so inconsistent. It literally just does this from week to week. And it's because they're kids, and because they're not reflecting in that way, and because they haven't figured it out. They don't really know. They just go in and they play, and that's beautiful in itself. But if you want to develop some consistency, you have to have an understanding of the things that work for you and the things that get in the way. And then it just becomes this continual process of for cliche, but plan, do, review.
Yeah.
What works? Why? Okay. How can I test that hypothesis? What didn't work? Why not? Again, how do I test that hypothesis? And then you start to put strategies in to go again. And also, I think that just a process like that, it removes the fear of failing, because failing and getting things wrong is all part of the learning process. It almost then becomes exciting and an opportunity, because you're testing stuff all the time. And I think that's the thing, particularly for youngsters, is that are we creating opportunities for people just to test, to try, to hypothesize, to figure stuff out? There's so much emphasis on performance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's tons of time in our life for performance and getting things right under pressure. We have a great opportunity just to become learners, but we don't seem to approach learning in the same way. As we don't place as much importance of the trial and error as we do on winning sometimes.
Yeah. So the second building block is all about why we're doing the thing that we're doing, right? What's our purpose? And you describe this in the book as finding our North Star. Tell me a bit about that.
I'll bring it to life. It is still one of my favorite. One of my most favorite jobs was working for the Cambridge rowing team, and this example actually is in the book. But I just love this story. And actually, you mentioned Kath Bishop. It was a call from Kath Bishop that led to that. That led to that piece of work. But I remember it vividly, getting a call in 2014 from Kath Bishop, who was she was an ex-Cambridge student, obviously an Olympic rower herself. And what had happened at that time was that the boat race, and most people have heard of the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. What people maybe are less familiar with is that really that was the Oxford-Cambridge men's boat race. And so the race that took place on the River Thames that has the TV and hundreds of thousands of spectators was a men's race. It was the Oxford men's crew versus the Cambridge men's crew. Well, all of that changed in 2015 because the sponsorship, the condition of sponsorship for that race was equality. So for the first time ever, the women were going to be allowed to race the Tideway. And it was a real historical moment. And essentially, I think Oxford had an Olympic medalist in their crew, and our crew were phenomenal, but just were not matched with Oxford and the level of international experience that the Oxford crew had been exposed to. And that year wasn't necessarily about winning the race. That year was all about, they had an opportunity, those individuals, to actually challenge the status quo, to create a legacy, to go down in history, to be the first women to ever race the Tideway. And that whole year, that was the North Star. I mean, the training program for those individuals is brutal. They are getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in the pitch black, and they're going out and training in the freezing cold. And then they're finishing that, and then they're studying at Cambridge University, and not soft subjects, tough academic programs all day. And then they finish, and then they go and train, and then they finish, and then they go home, and then they work until 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they do it all again. And I would imagine that there are times during that program where they're saying, why the hell are we doing this? But then that North Star shines so brightly because those individuals, they wanted to challenge the status quo. They wanted to create a legacy for all of those women that had come before them and were going to come after them, that they wanted to go down in history. They wanted to show up on that day with the hundreds of thousands of people and the bright lights and the camera crews, and just be able to race, be able to put out the best performance that they were capable of. And that's why it's important, because rowing's tough in that respect, because you start with a big squad, and as the season progresses, the selections happen. So you start with a big squad, and that gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the crew get selected at the end. So you've got lots of individuals that are in this team environment, but also competing against each other for their seat in the boat.
Yeah.
So having that high purpose, something that they all could get around, regardless of whether they were in the boat or not, whether they were in the blue boat or Blondie, which is the reserve boat, there was this thing that was connecting all of them, that they were all going after. And it was so powerful.
And I love the fact that this, the why, the purpose, it's not anything to do with the actual success.
No.
Or the outcome. It's about being part of something that's much bigger than that. Absolutely
that. And there was a very similar example also with the Euros. Like, we've touched upon this before around football has the power to connect and to inspire and to unite. And that led to the conversation between the players on the bus the morning after, the night before, after that final, of, okay, how can we use this platform for societal impact? And there came the letter to the Prime Minister around access to football in schools for girls, and that's what sport can do. And being able to utilize your platform for that higher purpose, that's really powerful and special, and that really does unite people.
So you're listening to the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Dr. Kate Hayes, and we've been talking about her book, How to Win, thinking about lessons from Kate's massive experience in sport and performance psychology, and how we can translate some of that into everyday life. Don't forget that you can listen to all of our other episodes, and you can subscribe at 80percentmental.com. And you can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast, or on Instagram at 80percentmental. Kate, we've just been chatting about the first two building blocks. So who are we and why are we here? And we were talking about purpose and kind of being part of something bigger. But that kind of leads really nicely into the third building block. It's almost like you designed this model. It's almost like you designed it this way on purpose. But it kind of leads nicely into the third one, which is having values and a mission and a purpose is all very well and good. But, you know, you touched on this a little bit earlier. Like, the third building block is, how do we play? Like, how do we take that mission, those values, that purpose, and turn it into, well, like, what are we actually doing? Like, what are the behaviors that are driving us towards that purpose? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think there's two pieces to this. I think part of it is about the behaviors, and then part of it is about the content of training. Mm-hmm. And we always say this, don't we? But it's so true, is to start with the end in mind. So that's certainly what we would do in Olympic sport. If we're working with an Olympic team or Olympic athletes, is what is it going to take to medal in 4 years' time? What performance is going to lead to that? Whether that's time or points or scores or whatever it might be, but what's it going to take? And then what's the gap between where you are currently and where you need to be? And then it becomes a process of, okay, and then how do we fill that gap? So where are the strengths? Where are the areas for development? Where are the performance gains to be made? How is that broken down? What's the physical component of that? What's the psychological component? What's the lifestyle balance? What's all of those separate pieces, so that you start to then structure, okay, this is what this looks like over a 4-year period. What does that look like for the first 12 months, for the first 6 months, for the next month, for the next day? And then that becomes that relentless process focus of continual reflection on, okay, what are we doing? What's working? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? And it always fascinates me. And I'm obviously biased because I've spent my life working in sport, but it fascinates me when I speak to friends of mine and they talk about their performance reviews that take place once a year. And I just, it bamboozles me that happens, is that they get an opportunity to discuss their performance targets, like every 6 months if they're lucky, and sometimes every 12. And I just, the work that we do on a day-to-day is just so different to that, because it's not even just every day, it's every single training session. Every single time anything is done, it is reviewed in absolute detail. Mm-hmm. And in every environment that I've worked with, like, the rugby players, as soon as training was finished, they'd be straight up in the analysis suite and analysing their performances. It's a continual process of analysis, of planning, of hypothesis testing, of going again to find any performance margin that you can. And so that's part of it when we talk about the method and how do we play. It's about breaking things down. It's about having targets. It's about aligning training to those targets. But it's also just about being relentlessly process focused. Everybody wants to win. That's a given. Focusing on winning on game day is not going to help you win. You need to be, in my opinion, particularly in a team sport, you need to be going out onto that field of play with absolute clarity in the game plan and absolute confidence in your ability to execute that game plan under the greatest pressure. And so essentially, when we talk about method, that's essentially what we're training people to be able to do. Yeah. We're training them to develop clarity in a game plan and confidence in their ability to execute that game plan under any circumstance.
So I was going to say, if we think about the fourth building block, this is the kind of how to win part of it. What are some of those things, right? What is the difference between doing all of this in theory, knowing your purpose, your strengths, your plan, your strategy, and then actually doing it? Like, what are some of the things in your experience that kind of get in the way? You mentioned pressure there, but.
Yeah, I think that, that's the big one, isn't it? I think that in a performance context, the thing that often gets in the way is pressure, and what triggers that pressure is different for everybody, but most usually it's judgment. What will people think? What if I don't get selected? What if I get it wrong? What if I mess this up? What if I don't hit the shot? What if I? And so what we're trying to do in sports psychology is help people manage that what if thinking. Is that, and again, this comes back to the confidence, the evidence-based belief. And I remember a track athlete once saying this to me, and again, a real simple analogy, but I loved it. Like, in the 4 years to an Olympic final, you're just paying into your bank account every single day. Every single day you're banking. Every single training session that you do, every single review that you make, every single plan that you achieve, it's all going into the bank account, so that when you come to the Olympic Games, you can make one hell of a big withdrawal because you know that you've saved up over time. And I think that's what it is, and it's not just hearsay. It's actually the way that you develop confidence for being able to perform is being able to demonstrate that you can when the pressure's on. And you get asked about this a lot, like, how do you recreate the pressure of a penalty shootout in training? You can't, and that's almost not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is create a response that feels similar. So you want to try to create a response of heart racing, of sweaty palms, of there being some level of importance to that, and then help the athletes develop the evidence that despite feeling like that, they can still execute their skills. So pressure training is a really good example, actually, of like a tool or of a mechanism, and setting that out really systemically. So what sort of scenario is a 0 out of 10 pressure? What's a 1 out of 10 pressure? What's a 2 out of 10 pressure? What's a 3 out of 10 pressure in terms of that anxiety response? And then helping people almost like work up that ladder. Yeah.
So it just in practice, I'm just thinking for anybody who's listening, who's got a big competition coming up, or has got another presentation to do on the horizon, like, how can they actually do that? How can you, like, say, systematically increase the pressure and train that response so that it's there? What are some kind of tips that you can take from pressure training that people can sort of simply do?
I think it's just up in the ante. And a really simple example of this is a recent one from home, a personal one, actually, of my daughter who was preparing for a audition for the school play. So she practiced a line, she'd done it, she'd been working through the script that she needed to say, she'd been practicing the song that she was going to perform. And then she went in on audition day, and there's like 6 teachers sat in a long table in front of her, and she's all on her own, stood there. I mean, that's very, very different to sitting in your bedroom, isn't it? Yeah, reciting a poem to yourself. And it's just about closing the gap. It's what's the gap between how you're training and what you're going to have to deliver under pressure, and where might there be some opportunities for closing that gap? Because ultimately the pressure is just perceived importance. So how can you increase the importance of what you're doing to start to generate some of those responses, and then learn to manage them, and doing that in a logical way, so you don't go from a 0 to delivering a pitch to get business. You start with planning your presentation, then you start to analyze at which point you might start to feel nervous, then you start to engage in, okay, well, I'm going to deliver this to 4 or 5 of my colleagues, and when I've done that, then we're going to compare that, and then we're going to get the boss in. Or it's just systematically preparing in a way in which then when you come into the big moment, you know that you can do it. And it's not just knowing that you can do it, it's predicting the point at which your emotional brain is going to kick in, because it always does. And predicting that in advance, knowing when that's likely to happen, so that when it does, instead of panicking about it, you can respond to that with, okay, here we go. We knew this was going to happen. We're going to smile, we're going to take a deep breath, and then we're going to go back to our processes, because actually we know what we're doing here. We expected this. This is all part of the process, but now I need to go back into focus on what I need to do in order to deliver.
Yeah, I love the way you described that there as reducing the gap, like the gap between sort of where I am now and the thing that I'm going to be doing, and the sort of the emotional responses to that.
Yeah.
I think for anybody who's interested in all of the things that we've been talking today, and I don't do this often on the podcast, I don't plug people's stuff, but I would absolutely recommend Kate's book, How to Win. Like I said, really accessible read, and some brilliant lessons and some really nice stories in there as well from your career. I'll put a link to the book in the episode description, so if you want to check it out, you can head to the episode description and find it there. Okay, I sort of mentioned mental health and well-being a little bit earlier, and the last sort of few years we've started to see examples of maybe unsustainable practices in sport. So athletes talking about going beyond breaking point physically and mentally, and was it worth it? We've got Jurgen Klopp as well in terms of coaching and managers talking about knowing that he hasn't got the energy to continue in these types of environments. And I just wondered what your take was on this idea of sustainability. Like, what does sustainability mean to you in the context of performance?
This is going to sound like a really cliched answer, but it's balance. And I think sometimes it takes a really long time to work out what that looks like for us, or for us as an individual. And there is no doubt that working in high performance sport, as in any other high performance context, is not demanding, is not time consuming, doesn't take you away from friends, family, from moments. It absolutely does. And I think that the way that I've started to, or the way that I approach it these days, probably in comparison to when I was younger, is that I still recognize that there are times where I will go missing from what's important a little bit.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to get a balance day to day, week to week, I almost periodize. This is going to be a really, really hard period. And then I may be able to down tools a little bit in this period to balance that up a bit. So there are things that I try to do on a day to day. I try to ensure that when I am with the family, I am present, because I have a tendency, just like a lot of people, I finish work, but it's still flying around in my head. I'm still processing. I'm still figuring things out. I'm still working out what's happened. I have to put parameters around when I am at home so that I can be at home. And I recognize that there are big periods of time where work is, it's just intense and time consuming. And that's actually what's required for those moments. I think we run into difficulties when those moments and those periods become life. So that becomes the norm. The work becomes the norm. The getting lost in the craft becomes the norm. And I don't think that's helped by that becoming the full identity. And that's why the work that the performance lifestyle staff do with athletes is so important, is that if you have multiple identities, if you are interested in things that extend beyond work or sport or whatever that thing might be, then that can only be healthy. I always say it to the athletes that I work with, there's no guarantees in this game apart from at some point you're going to have a bad day in the office. Like if that's your only thing, then that quickly transfers into all other areas of your life. And it isn't easy, and it is demanding, and it is challenging. But I also think that there is sometimes too much of a tendency to feel that you need to be responsible for everything and not be prepared to share that vulnerability. Because when you actually start speaking to people and really start speaking to people and start speaking to the person underneath the image of being portrayed, what you realize very quickly is that we're all experiencing very, very similar things. We all have the same vulnerabilities. We all have the same self-doubts. We all have the same days where we think, oh my goodness, I just can't do it today. That's human nature, and it's a reality for all of us. So I think having trusted people that you can go to, that you can be vulnerable with, that you can use as a logical sounding board when you've lost all rationality and logic because, quite frankly, you're just completely over capacity, that stuff is absolutely imperative.
This is the 80% Mental podcast. I'm here with Dr. Kate Hayes. Kate, I don't know how much time you spend listening to podcasts. I don't know whether you've listened to this number one in the world podcast before. But about this time, I like to play a little game with guests because I feel like we've talked a lot about your work and we've talked a lot about your book. We haven't really got to know you as a person. So first of all, are you up for playing my little game that I haven't told you about?
Well, I feel like that's a bit of a rhetorical question, Pete, if I'm completely honest. That feels like a question where there is just one answer, which I'm assuming should be yes. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so I've got 4 virtual envelopes, and in each envelope is a set of questions. The questions are this or that, favourites and firsts, hypotheticals, and perspectives. So I'm going to ask you to pick a number between 1 and 4, and I will select my virtual envelope, and we'll find out what set of questions you've got.
Let's go for 3.
3, okay. And we've got perspectives. So fairly quick fire. Anything you don't want to answer, you don't have to. But I'm going to ask you about your perspectives on some things.
Okay.
You seem nervous.
I'm actually okay. I just like this. I like the sound of some of the other categories a bit better. That's all. So I'm just dealing with my disappointment of not getting this or that.
Okay. All right. Let's start. First question then. What's something that you think everyone should experience at least once?
Getting things wrong. And having somebody with the confidence to be able to challenge that in a constructive way.
I like that. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
I'll tell you what the best advice I've ever been given actually is that since becoming a parent, I have this ongoing struggle, as I imagine most people do, between work, life, home, etc. And I remember someone was saying to me that the question in a similar situation, that the question that they've always asked themselves is, are the kids okay? Genuinely, like, are the kids okay? Are they doing okay? Are they genuinely happy? Are they doing all right at school? And are they making friends? And is their world, are they okay? Because if the answer to that is yes, then you're probably doing a better job than you think.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. We literally recorded an episode yesterday where we were talking about how we can manage all of the stuff that's happening in the world, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And part of the conversation was about, well, like what's my little world like? What's it like in my house? What's it like in sort of on my street, like my own little community? So I like that. Are the kids okay? As a way of sort of focusing in on sort of my little world when everything else feels like it's maybe a bit on fire.
Yeah, because the reality is we can't. There are times, aren't there? Like where you're not there as much as you want to be, and for lots of different reasons. Work's obviously the obvious one that you go to, but it might not be that. It might be that you've got sick relatives and you need to be spending time there, so it takes you away from the family. Like there's all sorts of different things, isn't there, that can part of the rich tapestry of life. But sometimes I think, particularly if I've been away for a really, really long time, like that's when you always reflect, is this the right thing? Should I be at home more? And it was just really good advice for me, because it was really simple. But are they okay? Well, actually, yeah, they are more than okay. They're having a great old time with Granny where they get to eat sweets and syrup or whatever it is that they get up to at Granny's house. They're fine.
Okay, what's one trait that you value most in other people?
Optimism.
Okay.
I have absolutely no issues with critical feedback at all. I welcome it. I like it. I like people highlighting where things could be done differently or where things could be improved. But what's great is when that is done with I've been thinking, how about we try? Or maybe we should look at. I like the energy. I like the energy that optimism brings of finding a way.
What's something that instantly lifts your spirits?
Optimism. Okay. Well, laughter. Like genuinely, I like work in environments where you can have fun, and I like play. And I've been reflecting on this quite a lot as an adult. My husband and I went on holiday a while back to Croatia, and there was one of those like big, those big like wipeout inflatable things. I said, "Come on in, let's go." Oh, we can't do that. That's just for the kids. Like, it's not like anyone's allowed to do this stuff. Anyway, I made him. So we went and got our little life jackets, and it was the most fun, honestly, just to laugh. And I think that usually is a difference, isn't it, between us as kids and us as adults? Like the kids, I want to be a zookeeper, I want to be a scientist, I want to make a rocket pack, everything's exciting, everything's fun, everything's a game. And then somewhere along the line, we lose this, I don't know, willingness or time just to have fun, just to go do something for the sake of doing it.
Silly.
Yeah, just to be silly. That's what I love. And me too. That's what gives me energy, silliness. Absolutely.
What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Oh, tell you what, I've had recently with writing the book, and I've been quite honest about that. I think it's quite a vulnerable thing to do, and there was some natural nervousness around that, but the response that I've had has made it's not true to say it's made it all worthwhile. The response I have has been phenomenal, and I've reflected on this. I think that quite often women find themselves in male dominated environments, and I don't know whether at times that influences people to feel that they need to behave and be a certain way. And one of the things that I've noticed, I think, in the last 10 years is I feel that women are much more supportive of other women these days. I feel like there's been a real shift. And one of the greatest compliments I've had really recently was from another female who just reached out to say how inspiring it was to see another female in what can quite traditionally be seen as a male-dominated environment have the confidence to feel vulnerable, but still put their ideas out there and be prepared just to give it a go. And the fact that me could be inspiring to somebody else, I mean, that it's been amazing. But I just think we could do so much more for that. Like we could do so much more of championing each other, highlighting the things that you see other people do well, instead of almost this fight to the top.
Yeah.
So it's been a really humbling experience for me, and I've had some unbelievable conversations with some brilliant people off the back of it, of just around, when everyone starts to really just be honest about how they're feeling. There's a lot of insecurity shared, and actually how much greater the world would be if we were actively highlighting people's strengths and champion them and giving them the platform to really fly. So that's a very long-winded way of saying it. A really nice comment recently has been someone that said it's inspiring to see a woman be prepared to kind of put a book out in a male-dominated world.
We'll do one more. It's a really simple one. If you had to sum up your life philosophy in one sentence,
what
would that be?
That's the greatest question ever, isn't it? A real simple one to end on. What's your life philosophy? But do you know, I have got a really succinct answer to that question.
Oh, go on.
And do you know why? Because I went through a process of understanding my why, and I'm working that through with somebody else and really digging into my life story and my experiences and some of the things that I've gone through. So weirdly, I can answer your very complex question. My life philosophy is to focus people on the stuff that really matters, so that together we can discover new territory and realize our dreams.
Wow. That
was very succinct.
Yeah, no, I like it. It was awesome. Well, Kate, thanks so much for playing our game. I feel like I've got to know you a little bit better, and I hope our listeners have as well.
Oh, more than welcome. I actually enjoyed it. What was, give me an example of the this or that though.
Oh, like pineapple on pizza, yes or no? That sort of
stuff. No, never, ever, Pete. It's always a no, always.
People feel really strongly about
that. It's awful. It's literally like the worst thing, pineapple on pizza.
Well, a bonus this or that question for everyone then.
Great.
Okay, so just to finish off then, Kate, I've got just a couple more questions for you before we finish up the episode. We've already talked about the fact that you felt a bit nervous putting yourself out there when you were writing this book, and sort of your reasons for doing so. What did you learn about yourself, like through the process of writing it?
What a great question. I think it actually reinforced something about myself, which is I've learned the most in my life through the circumstances where I've been really outside of my comfort zone. And actually this was there was never a question of not doing it, even though at times I felt really uncomfortable. And I did think about it at times. I overthought it, but there was never a question that I wasn't going to do it. And I think I've always been a little bit that way. So I think it reinforced to me that, and this probably lends itself into my optimism a little bit as well, but no matter how difficult things are, you'll work through it and you'll find a way, and it will end up being a good thing. And, you know, I've got a great support network in place around me. And when I have the times where I need to borrow somebody else's logical brain because I don't have access to my own, I have those people. I have those people around me, and I think that's important for all of us. It's not true that people just float through life confident and positive and don't ever have that internal narrative that's causing them to ask questions of themselves. And there's real power and strength that comes from being prepared to share those vulnerabilities, to have those conversations, to talk to people about how you're feeling, because sometimes we can rely on ourselves and sometimes we need a helping hand. So yeah, I just think learned through the process. I've learned that there are far better storytellers in the world than me. But I've also learned that, and I had some help with the book from an absolutely brilliant storyteller. But I've learned that I am really diligent, and still after all these years, I can absolutely get lost in a project. And that I can be okay with feeling uncomfortable, and I can work through it, and I can come out the other side.
You got any plans to write any more?
No, not right now. maybe one day. It genuinely, it was an absolutely brilliant. It was a brilliant process, genuinely, and I do feel proud. I feel like I hopefully have achieved what I set out to, which was to write a sports psychology book that felt like a storybook that anybody could pick up and read and apply to their life, regardless of whether they were, you know, a mum, a dad, a teacher, a dentist, a 400-meter runner. The lessons in there are for everybody. And they're lessons that I've learned from lots of people that I've had the opportunity to be around. So it was a really, really good thing. It was a huge commitment of time and effort and mental resource. So I would like to, but I think it'll be some way in the future, I think.
Take a bit of a break first. Right?
Yeah.
Well, listen, Kate, first of all, it's just been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you.
Yeah, you too.
But I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on the podcast and talk about sports psychology, and obviously talk about your book as well. And yeah, if people wanted to reach out and get a hold of you, what's the best way that they can do that? You got a website?
I have got a website. I'm on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm not the greatest at social media, I'll be very honest. I feel like it's I feel like sometimes it's a bit of a necessary evil, but I am on LinkedIn, and I do have a website, and I'm relatively straightforward to find, I think, on a Google search.
Well, we'll do the same thing. We'll stick all of those in the episode description, along with the links to the book, if anyone's interested in going out and getting a hold of a copy. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It's been brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been really, really nice to speak to you, Pete. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope that you guys out there in listener land have enjoyed the conversation as well. Again, if you've got a comment, or you want to kind of chat about your thoughts on the episode, you can do so on the website 80percentmental.com. Or you can find us on Twitter at EPM Podcast, or on Instagram at 80percentmental. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. There'll be more to come, and I will see you next time. I won't see you though, because it's a podcast, isn't it?